Hey all, Alex here at your home of the Music Deep Dive, and today we are counting down the best albums of another year in music. We are going to be counting down the top 25 albums of 1954. So again, much like 1953, where I was a bit surprised by the volume of quality records already being released at that point, 1954 is very much in the same boat. I was not really prepared for the volume of really quality records across the board, certainly very heavily in the jazz realm, as we will find out here, but even dipping into the pop genres and things like that as well to an extent. Now, as far as the musical landscape goes, in 1954, you have just kind of a plethora of different things that are building off of the accomplishments of 1953 that I talked about in the previous video. So I talked about Elvis Presley making his very first recordings ever during that point. 1954 is when he officially starts tracking records for commercial sale with Sun Records and starts making a name for himself in the local Memphis area. I talked about Frank Sinatra and him being signed to Capitol Records. 1954 is when he puts out his first records with Capitol. And that is all kind of swirling around the gradual rise of rock and roll music at this point. You have Big Joe Turner releasing his version of Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which would in turn inspire a rendition by Bill Haley and his Comets. And Haley's rendition will ultimately become very popular, a very top 10 single in both the US and the UK, and ultimately paves the way for the success of yet another Bill Haley single the following year, Rock Around the Clock, which really is what pushes rock and roll into becoming a mainstream craze among teenage audiences. So you are seeing the seeds of revolutions in multiple levels of popular music. And again, that's not even getting into some of the major events and major figures who are starting to release records in the jazz world as well. One of the figures in question being, of course, Clifford Brown. Chet Baker is becoming very prominent. We will see the two of them multiple times in this video, but we are seeing a revolution as far as you kind of have the first generation of bop players, your Charlie Parkers and your Dizzy Gillespies, who are still active at this point. Charlie Parker, not for much longer, but they're active, but they are starting to already be usurped by this new generation of players who are steering bebop music towards the hard bop direction, these more kind of hard-edged, blues-inspired solos and things like that, that are, again, really pushing jazz music into this more improvisation-heavy direction. So a lot of really interesting things that, again, are continuing to set the stage for even more massive and explosive developments later on, but a lot of really great music that holds up just kind of on its own and in its own regard in general in 1954, and that's what we're here to talk about today. I should also say as well that in 1954, you still have the 10-inch as a format, and it's a very relevant format, but the 12-inch long-playing record is continuing to become more and more prominent. It'll be a couple of years until the 10-inch as a format is completely usurped by the 12-inch long-playing record. So again, you're going to have kind of a mixture of formats on this list and in some of the next few. But again, we're seeing this transition happen in real time, and musicians are starting to really experiment with what more space for musical content will allow them to do, and how it will inspire not just the amount of tracks, and how not just in how it will influence the amount of tracks that are on the record, but also in how it will influence the song structures, how long they can make specific songs, and that sort of thing. So a lot of major kind of technological innovations are happening at around this same time. So again, a very fertile period for music, for recorded music, certainly. And you really are hearing the results of that in a lot of the records that we're going to be talking about today. As I said, this is a top 25 list, but there are so many just good albums in 1954 that it would be a shame to go without mentioning any of them. First off, I'm not including it as an official honorable mention because it was not one of my favorite records from the year, but I have to shout out the absurdly long Bing, a musical autobiography by Bing Crosby. I am fairly certain that this is the longest record I have ever listened to. It is a behemoth, a quintuple album, a 4-hour long quintuple album at that. I think it's like 3 hours 45 or something like that. It's a compilation of re-recordings and things like that, of stuff that of singles that Crosby had recorded all the way back to the very beginning of his career, hence the name. And then once it gets to the later period, it becomes like just the original singles. So you kind of have a mixture of things here. Again, I'm not shouting it out as an honorable mention. I'm not recommending that people listen to it, even though it is perfectly well executed. But again, I do want to shout out that this is a thing that exists. So if you were curious about what an almost 4-hour long Bing Crosby record sounds like, I'm going to shout this one out. Again, if you're curious, it's worth checking out, I suppose, to say that you've heard it. But as far as official honorable mentions go, I'm going to throw out 10 different names here. Ella Fitzgerald, Songs for a Mellow Mood. The Max Roach Quartet with the Max Roach Quartet featuring Hank Mobley. The Thelonious Monk Quintet with Thelonious Monk Quintet Blows for LP. Eartha Kitt with That Bad Eartha. I'm just going to say, I did like this. I kind of wish I liked this record a little bit more. I think the sort of diversity of styles and languages that it's trying to go for is so diverse that it's almost comical. She puts on some accents, like a Scottish accent at one point on one track that I'm not especially keen on. So I wish I liked it more. It might grow on me, but for now, it's just an honorable mention. Beyond that, I have Paul Bley with Introducing Paul Bley. The Barbara Carroll Trio with their self-titled record, really interesting piano jazz record here. Jacques Brel with Jacques Brel et ses chansons, debut record from the French chansonnier. Billie Holiday, self-titled record. Oscar Peterson, really a couple of records I could have gone with here. His Richard Rodgers record is really strong, but I'm ultimately going to throw out Plays Harry Warren. And then just missing the list here, Sarah Vaughan with Images. I love Sarah Vaughan as a singer, and her time will come, certainly. I guarantee she will be making at least one of these videos, if not several. But with that said, let's get into talking about the top 25. At number 25, I have the great Charles Mingus making his first appearance with The Moods of Mingus, released on Savoy. Not Mingus's first release. He had put out a release the year before with the pianist Nadi Kamar, who at that time was going by his birth name Spalding Givens. And that record I thought was fairly sparse and fairly bland. It was actually arguably my least favorite thing that I ended up hearing for 1953. But I think The Moods of Mingus is already a lot more interesting. You have this sextet ensemble here. It's a lot fuller of a sound. And already this progressive big band style that Mingus would popularize is very established. You have people like John LaPorta, George Barrow, and Tio Macero on the saxophones who make for this really stellar trifecta that just helps give this record a really massive sound. You're already starting to hear Mingus's experimental side on tracks like Gregorian Chant. And there's also some really great clarinet work from, I think, Macero, possibly one or two others on songs like Getting Together that really just kind of anchored the whole thing. It's definitely a fledgling project. I still think compared to what Mingus will do later on, it's a little bit rudimentary, but already a massive step forward from the types of compositions and the types of recording that he had already been doing. So absolutely worthy of a spot on this list. The Moods of Mingus, my number 25. At number 24, I have the self-titled record by the Thelonious Monk Quintet, released on Prestige. Solid release here. Again, you have a quintet lineup. Art Blakey, probably the most notable player otherwise on it, but really I think everybody stands out. I love the rendition of Smoke Gets in Your Eyes here. Again, Monk himself with this very trilling piano here over Blakey's cymbal work. Really love these kind of like chordal backings from Ray Copeland on the trumpet and Frank Foster on the tenor sax. I think it just works so well. I also love the intro to the track Locomotive. I think that's really stellar. You have these kind of like octave patterns and Foster saxophone that mesh with the bass work from Curly Russell. And it really just fills in that low end so nicely. And I think Copeland does a really excellent job on the higher end. Don't think it's as strong as the 1953 Thelonious record, but a really solid, really strong release from a really capable ensemble. And yeah, the Thelonious Monk Quintet comes in at my number 24. Strong release. At number 23, I have Bing Crosby with Some Fine Old Chestnuts, released on Decca. This is one of several records that Crosby would ultimately do in his career with the Buddy Cole Trio, who were kind of his ensemble that he did radio shows with. And it's the same ensemble that anchors the aforementioned 4-hour-long Bing Crosby record. And really, I think the only reason why it's worth sitting through it all. I think Cole as a pianist is really just adept at bouncing off of Crosby's phrasing and just laying a really nice foundation. I think it really lifts this whole thing. There's a really great jauntiness to tracks like Somebody Loves Me. I think that one's really excellent. And then you had these kind of clusters of chords, these more kind of chordal and denser ideas on tracks like After You've Gone. So he's a diverse pianist. And again, I think Crosby is such an effective interpreter of songs, even with his self-admitted limited range, that I think this works really nicely. I'm not really convinced that Crosby is ever going to get a super high placement on this list as an albums artist, because that's not really his forte. That's not really his thing. But I do think that this is a pretty strong record. I would imagine it'll be one of his stronger records kind of overall, and a very digestible length as well. So very easy to pop on and check out when you have a moment. Some Fine Old Chestnuts by Bing Crosby, my number 23. At number 22, I have Errol Garner with Mambo Moves Garner, released on Mercury. Mambo was a major craze around this time in the mid-1950s. In many ways, it's a craze that was parallel with the rock and roll craze from that era, as well as kind of calypso music, which was a little bit more popular even a little bit earlier. And Mambo didn't stick necessarily. It's still viewed as a novelty thing, but it did produce some quality records such as this one. As the name suggests, this is basically just an album of piano improvisations over mambo grooves, and it's a lot of fun. It's a non-stop energy fest. Garner's song structures here, compared to the record of his that we talked about in the 1953 video, the self-titled record, definitely not as elaborate of structures and arrangements, but what you get here is still some really adept playing, like on the opening track, Mambo Garner. I think that one's terrific. I really like the rendition of Old Black Magic on here. Begin the Begin is solid. Closing track Sweet Sue is really great. You just have a really kind of strong collection of tracks where Garner is really just kind of flexing his muscles, and again, showing why I think he's one of the most underrated jazz pianists of his generation and potentially of all time. So again, not a record that I would say is as strong as his 1953 release, but a very easy one to put on and enjoy. And I think one of the records that was part of this mambo craze that I think has aged the best. So Errol Garner, Mambo Moves Garner, my number 22. At number 21, I have Clifford Brown with New Star on the Horizon, released on Blue Note. Clifford Brown, I mean, this was his year. He is going to pop up on several of these records, and I think even popped up on some records that I didn't include on this list. But he has a coming out party, a real coming out party this year. This is a Blue Note session that was recorded in a sextet setting, and the lineup itself is not necessarily the most immediately outstanding thing I've ever seen. But I think Blakey on the drums is a really great foundation. I think Gigi Grice, who is definitely a really interesting figure in this era of jazz music, who's a little bit forgotten about, but I think has some great contributions to records. And I'm excited to potentially explore some solo stuff of his. He adds flute on some of these tracks, like on the song Easy Living, which I think is a really nice sonic change up. Again, you don't necessarily associate this type of like bop or hard bop sound with flutes per se, but I think Grice makes it fit in pretty naturally. the track Cherokee on here, the opening track, I mean, holy shit, that is just an absolute banger. Brown absolutely shreds through that one and proves why, as far as just being a technician or what have you, he is about as good as it gets from that era. And I am including people like Miles Davis in that. Just a really brilliant player and a really versatile player. And you, again, will continue to see this pop up more and more as we continue through the list. So Clifford Brown, new star on the horizon, excellent project, comes in at my number 21. At number 20, I have Lolita Cuevas and France Cassius with Haitian Folk Songs, released on Folkways. One of a couple of different Folkways records that were based off of the folk songs of Haiti, and we will be talking about the other one here fairly shortly. This is a collaboration between Cuevas, who was a popular singer of the day, and then Cassius, the very acclaimed Haitian guitarist. And essentially, the foundation of these recordings is these are based off of merengues, again, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which are, these very kind of like, these dances, these culturally significant dances. And these are these recordings certainly are very stately, very kind of on the slower side, and without having the cultural context to say one way or the other if this is representative of the genre, I do think ultimately it's very lovely and very beautiful. I think that Cuevas herself has a really nice voice, and I think that she pairs well with Cassius's guitar arrangements, which are very minimalist, but not technically simple either. He's still doing some fairly complex picking patterns by the sounds of it. And yeah, it's really nice. It's a really nice document, but it's not, again, compared to other things that Folkways has put out and will put out, it doesn't even necessarily just feel like a document or like an artifact. It feels like something that actually has a foot in the door of what is popular culturally in general. So this doesn't feel necessarily just like archaeological work, if you will, which, some of these Alan Lomax inspired or offshoot projects and things like that can feel like. So really lovely record. Definitely recommend it, again, along with the other record that we'll be talking about later. Haitian Folk Songs, Lolita Cuevas and France Cassius, my number 20. At number 19, I have Georges Brassens with Le Vent, released on Polydor. This is a set of songs very much along the lines of Brassens' first record. If you like the first record, I have very little doubt that you will enjoy this one. There's a little bit more lewdness on this record, I think, than the previous one. You have tracks like the titular Le Vent, or The Wind, about the wind blowing a woman's blouse up. And then you have tracks like Brave Margot, about a woman who adopts a cat and then proceeds to breastfeed it. So you have that sense of just kind of oddball, sexual, lewd humor that's kind of amusing. But there are moments of beauty on here. There are certain tracks that are taken from what I understand anyways, popular poems of the day that also make this record feel a little bit more grounded, I suppose, than the first record was. It feels a little bit more, not necessarily like he's trying to do something cutting and edgy. It feels a little bit more perhaps profound, or perhaps more kind of satisfied with itself. I don't know how to articulate that necessarily, but that's kind of the vibe I get. So it's an enjoyable record. Again, same exact strength, same exact type of very sparse instrumentation. And I'm curious to see, again, with his other records, kind of how this evolves, if it does, and where to go from there. So Georges Brassens, Le Vent, comes in at my number 19. Number 18, I have the self-titled record by Charlie Parker, released on Clef. This is a record, this is probably Charlie Parker's best studio album, if we're being honest. And that's much more so, I think, indicative of the fact that he came to prominence in a time before albums were really a central format, and died before he could really get the chance to record much more. But nevertheless, this is still a strong record. It's based off of 2 different sessions. I think the A-side, which comes from a session from July 1953, is superb. I think it's absolutely superb bop music. Some of the only studio recordings that Parker made of a few of his best known pieces, which is really interesting. So in that sense, I think it's a recording to be treasured because it's a rare in-studio documentation of that. Songs like Now's the Time, Confirmation, Chi Chi, that sort of thing. I will say I think the second half of the record is a bit more laid back and doesn't necessarily have the same level of energy. This is from an earlier session from the end of 52. But it's still quite pleasant. I still like several of the tunes on here, like I Hear Music and like Kim, for instance. So you still get to hear Parker's core kind of abilities with a couple of different ensembles and a couple of different settings. And again, I think more than anything, it speaks to the tragedy of the fact that he died way too soon and before he had the chance to potentially release some of his greatest work. But the self-titled Charlie Parker record, definitely worth checking out. I think, again, start with the singles for Charlie Parker. Start with his like 40 singles and stuff like that before you move on to his later stuff. But this is excellent and definitely worth checking out. Self-titled Charlie Parker, my number 18. At number 17, I have Frank Sinatra with Swing Easy, released on Capitol. This is the second of 2 records that Sinatra put out in 1954 on Capitol, and not a spoiler for anyone who's watched the Frank Sinatra video, we will be talking about the other one in a bit. Swing Easy is exactly what it sounds like. It is an up-tempo swing number that is about the easiest thing to digest that you could possibly hope for. Nelson Riddle completely controlling the arrangements here for the first time on a Sinatra record and really does an excellent job. Just one of those things, absolutely excellent. I'm going to sit right down and write myself a letter is really fun. Wrap Your Troubles in Dreams is a joy. All of Me, superb way to close the record. It's so breezy. Sinatra sounds great singing on top of it. And you pair this up with the fact that this is 8 songs and less than 20 minutes in length. And it goes by in an absolute blast. It's something that you can listen to like on your lunch break at work or something like that. And that is the appeal. And that is what makes this, even when all is said and done, I think one of Sinatra's better up-tempo swing records, better up-tempo focused records. He will outdo it on his next one, of course, as I'm sure we will get to, but an absolutely enjoyable record. And again, just really a testament to already how much stronger the material, the arrangements, and the performances are in this era of Sinatra's career. Swing Easy comes in at my number 17. At number 16, I have Franz Cassius with Haitian Dances, released on Folkways. This is the second of the 2 Cassius records from this year, and the second of the 2 Cassius records that he put out in general. I guess he put out one in like the early 70s that I've not heard, but really, yeah, this is the focal point of Cassius's legacy are these 2 recordings. And I think specifically this one, very much like Haitian folk songs is, this is a very beautiful and touching record. I think Cassius plays these traditional songs in just such a soft and really delicate way. But again, coming back to his skills as a guitarist, these are intimate songs, these are delicate songs, but they're not technically easy either. There's a very haunting nature to these pieces at times. I'm thinking of the track Sobo, which is actually a duplicate track that's actually also on the Lolita Cuevas record, Haitian Folk Songs. That one strikes me. That's probably my favorite piece on either of those records. And I saw someone say somewhere that the guitar playing feels like something Leonard Cohen would have imitated, and that's a statement they made about this whole record, and I sort of see it for most of it, but then, especially on that last track, I hear it, and it definitely sounds like a picking pattern Cohen would have done in like the early 70s or something like that. Really great, and definitely I think the place to start if you're just looking to dip your toe into the water in this stuff. But again, it's a very easy listen, entirely instrumental, and really just some really great guitar playing, very delicate, very sparse, and occasionally haunting, as I said. So lovely piece of music, definitely worth checking out. Franz Cassius, Haitian Dances, my number 16. At number 15, I have Ben Webster with the Consummate Artistry of Ben Webster. This has been re-released in the since then under the name King of the Tenors, so that's probably how you will find it if you were looking for it on physical media or on streaming services. One of Webster's, I think, most notable records, certainly one of his most notable solo recordings. If you don't know much about Ben Webster, I think he's one of the greatest tenor sax players to ever pick up the instrument. And I think that ability really shines through here. He's playing with kind of a couple of different ensemble settings. There's kind of a core trio that underlies this whole record, but that is mixed with these kind of larger ensemble performances that jump into some of these other songs. And so because of that, you get to hear him in these kind of intimate settings, but you also get to hear him in larger settings where there's a little bit more of a noise element. And I think that's really cool. I love Tenderly. I think his rendition of that, the melody of that is superb. There's a couple of Ellington tracks on here, like Don't Get Around Much Anymore and Cottontail. So I think Webster does a great job there. The track That's All is excellent. I love the breathy tone that he does on that track especially, and how, again, it kind of starts with the trio accompaniment, but it eventually moves and expands into a kind of larger ensemble sound with this great muted trumpet performance by Harry Edison. So, yeah, it's a really strong, accessible record. Webster's going to pop up on this list in the future, I'm sure, with a lot of like collaborative projects that he does with other artists, but the focus is on Ben himself here, and I think he comes through in flying colors, with flying colors. So Ben Webster, the Consummate Artistry of Ben Webster, or King of the Tenors, your mileage may vary. Either way, it's my number 15. At number 14, I have Duke Ellington with The Duke Plays Ellington Piano Reflections, released on Capitol. So what I want you to do is take what you heard me say about the other Duke Ellington records that appeared in the previous videos and just kind of throw it out the window. This is completely the opposite as far as what is going on here. This is the Duke on piano playing with the trio. It's a very intimate record. There's none of the bombast that you get in previous records. And I adore this because it's such a solid peek, I think, into the heart of these songs. Ellington is widely regarded as one of the great American songwriters in history, certainly of the Great American Songbook era, if you will. And I think this is the type of record that really exposes just how sharp these songs are harmonically, melodically, and everything else. Reflections in D is possibly my favorite song on here. I think it's just an all-time Ellington recording. I just love how stunning it is. It gives me very strong romantic vibes. I don't mean romance the sentiment, I mean romantic the era. But really just powerful, really great. Again, in a sentimental mood, as it pretty much always is excellent. There's some solidly moving tunes, more kind of upbeat tunes on here, like B-sharp blues that I think are really excellent too. But again, for the most part, you get this stripped back sense. Ellington as a pianist, even at this point in his career, I think is still really sharp. And again, just does what makes sense for the songs by the sounds of it. And what you get is something that is ultimately pretty moving and just really deeply, deeply pleasant to listen to. I don't know if this is one of the more essential Ellington records ever, but I do think people who maybe struggle with the more bombastic sound of some of his other stuff might want to take a look at this one. The Duke Plays Ellington, Piano Reflections. It is my number 14. At number 13, I have the Dave Brubeck Quartet with Jazz Goes to College, released on Columbia. So I said in previous videos that we would be talking about live albums, at least on occasion here. And so this is going to be one of the examples where we shall do so. And this is definitely one of the more energetic Brubeck recordings that I've heard. I think Brubeck has an association with this, again, this very West Coast sound, which is generally, I think, seen to be very kind of low key. And if there is a bit of an upbeat nature, it is oftentimes very Latin influenced. But that's not really the case here. And I think so much of that has to do with Paul Desmond's presence on here. I think he slaps. And I really love, again, how versatile his playing is and how his solos adapt for the mood very well. I think he has some great moments on slower tracks like Balcony Rock. And then you have these kind of upbeat, very like bop adjacent numbers if they are not straight up bop recordings like Les Souk and I Want to Be Happy. And Brubeck himself is definitely, I think how I would describe him is that he's a very deliberate player. He's not quite the level of just pure dexterity and impulse that some of the other great pianists from this era are, but he makes his deliberate structure work really well. I really like his approach to Take the A Train on here, which is a great recording in general. It's not very flashy, but it mixes these very chordal and trill-like patterns into his solos, and I think that works really nicely. And again, the audience is really enthusiastic on here as well. Really shows kind of the impact that Brubeck as a performer was having, even several years before Take 5 was even a thing. So, as an early recording, in fact, I think the first Brubeck recording for Columbia, if I'm not mistaken, it's very sharp. Well worth checking out. One of the better jazz live albums from this era, in my opinion. And yeah, Jazz Goes to College, number 13. At number 12, I have Bud Powell with the amazing Bud Powell Volume 2, released on Blue Note. Bud Powell, man. I don't think I have talked about Bud Powell very much in these videos yet, but one, just a stellar pianist, and another person whose career I think was ended far too soon, certainly, but I think altered in a very negative way far too soon. When you read his story, you never get you get the sense that he never quite lived up to his full potential for reasons that were really not of his own doing. This record is really, really strong. It's a very kind of sharp collection of tunes that were all recorded in a single session. It's a trio accompaniment that he is fronting here. And I do think that this is ultimately, in some ways, not quite as strong as the stuff he was doing in the 40s and like early 50s, but you still get plenty of chances to shine. It's still a really sharp record, and he's an inventive soloist. I really like his rendition of tracks like Autumn in New York and I Want to Be Happy, Polka Dots and Moonbeams. The highlight to me is Glass Enclosure, though. It's an absolutely just stunning piece that was, I think, partially inspired by one of his stints in a mental hospital, if I'm not mistaken. And it's one of the more inventive things I think that he ever wrote, potentially, and definitely ranks among the absolute best Powell recordings. In fact, it might be my personal favorite. Hard to really say. Again, I don't know that this is necessarily the best representation of him, but it's definitely a good place to start. You get, again, a lot of really strong performances. It is amazing how even with the, electroshock treatments and the mental hospital stays and all the kind of social and mental struggles that he was dealing with, that he could still go into a recording studio and come out with records that sound this brilliant. The Amazing Bud Powell, Volume 2, my number 12. At number 11, I have Dorival Caymmi with Canções Praieras, released on Odeon. And I apologize if I mispronounced any of those. Dorival Caymmi is a really interesting figure. One of the forefathers of bossa nova music as we know it today. Not necessarily a practitioner of it per se. Again, he's more so proto bossa nova than anything else, but a major figure in that genre and just in the history of Portuguese music. This album it's excellent. It's terrific. And again, another reason why, if you are listening to songs that are not in English, in Portuguese in this case, why it really is essential that you look up the translations of the lyrics to understand what is going on. Because I have heard this record before, and the first time I didn't really do that. But hearing this again and really sitting with the translations, the record is literally titled Beach Songs, and that is a huge part of the Caymmi ethos, as far as I understand, is that he wrote a lot of songs about water and the beach and that sort of thing. And all the tracks on this record do in fact deal with the water. But what I love about it is it deals with the water, the ocean, as it were, in many different ways, in ways that are both reverent but also haunting. You have songs about the beauty of water and about how dependent we are on it, but also songs about dying in the ocean, songs about the amount of lives the waves have taken, that sort of thing. These songs that kind of are analogous to like these, seafaring folk tunes from England or Ireland or Scotland or whatever that we in the West, in English speaking Western countries, Anglophone countries, are very associated with. So from a lyrical standpoint, it's very haunting and dark, and it works well with the actual songs, which are very sparse, very beautiful in that way. And Kaimi as a singer, as an interpreter of these songs, is really terrific. There's a very strong sense of dynamism and warmth in his voice, which is a very nice baritone, not a very low baritone, but a very solid and resonant one. And so, again, you get a lot of character and a lot of, again, real force and emphasis in the appropriate moments, which I really like. So if you were someone who was interested in Portuguese music and that sort of thing, and in Brazilian music in general, then this is definitely a go-to record for sure if you want to understand that history. And if you're just interested in songs about the water in general, if you're one of those folks, there's a lot to chew on here for sure. So, Dorival Caymmi, Canções Praeiras, my number 11. At number 10, I have Toshiko Akiyoshi with Toshiko's Piano, released on Norgran. What an interesting record. One of my favorite pure discoveries from this year. In fact, I think my favorite as far as records that I had not heard before. Akiyoshi, Japanese-born pianist who was discovered by Oscar Peterson, and Peterson arranged to have her record with his ensemble and put out this record on Norgran. And eventually I think it would be re-released on Verve, Peterson's label. And Akiyoshi is a very interesting pianist. Also, for the record, another artist who is still alive as of the recording of this video, 95 years old. Congratulations to her. It's interesting because you have a very clear comparison that you can draw, because she is playing with Peterson's ensemble, and certainly I at this point have become very accustomed to Oscar Peterson's piano style and his playing style. Akiyoshi's is definitely different. It has a very distinct character to it. She is a very kind of bright style of playing, and one that is very there's a virtuoso quality to her playing, where she can play very elegant and very tender stuff, but there are times where she just absolutely shreds. The track Shadrach is superb. I mean, absolutely blistering and brilliant bit of playing on here. She is just absolutely going haywire. The track Soledado is really great. There's some really nice handoffs in the melody between Herb Ellis's guitar and Akiyoshi's piano. I think that's really, really nice. I think certainly What Is This Thing Called Love and I Want to Be Happy are really excellent. Akiyoshi is, again, it's a very distinct style of playing, but I wouldn't be so ignorant as to call it, something that is distinctly Eastern either. I just think it is a unique style that, I don't know, isn't necessarily as blues inspired in some ways. It doesn't feel as deeply rooted in the blues, but that's not to say that it lacks aggression or that it lacks a lot of power, because she absolutely provides that in spades. It's really a brilliant performance. I think the ensemble works well off of her, and really I think she pushes the ensemble in ways that Peterson's playing doesn't. And I really like that. I really like that character. And this was a really fun discovery, really cool thing to check out for the first time, and I highly recommend people give it a listen, and then explore some of her other stuff as well. Again, give flowers to the artists who are still here to receive it. Toshiko Akiyoshi, Toshiko's Piano, my number 10. At number 9, I have June Christie with Something Cool, released on Capitol. June Christie, a really interesting singer, not one that's necessarily talked about as much these days. Very much an artist who is emblematic of the 50s and not necessarily much beyond that. But that's a little bit unfair, I think. So she got her start with Stan Kenton. That's really where she made her name, singing with this very kind of progressive style of big band music that Kenton was continuing to pioneer. And this record, which is her first proper solo release, is a step away from that, but maybe only a small step. Pete Rugolo is on the arrangements here, and I think he does a great job. I really enjoy the record overall. I think the arrangements on tracks like the title track, Something Cool, and A Stranger Called the Blues are really outstanding and really massive. They feel like good Kenton imitations, I suppose, and I really appreciated that. Christie as a singer is really interesting in a very cool way. Her voice has this huskiness to it, a little bit Peggy Lee-like, but I think the difference is that Christie's voice has such a kind of like a gravel, I guess, to it, a weight to it, where when she pushes her voice dynamically, it almost sounds like she's on the brink of losing it altogether at times. And that dynamic right there, that like tension, gives the vocals a lot of character. It feels like someone who is genuinely working within like technical limitations and pushing herself in a really interesting way. And I really like that. Again, I think the aforementioned tracks I really like. I like Lonely House. I'll Take Romance is excellent. Yeah, it's just a really strong vocal jazz record from this era. Not my favorite from 1954 even, but really, really strong. And in many ways, her most lasting kind of achievement, I suppose, the record that she's the most known for. But I am curious to see if there are other records of hers later on that are going to be worth checking out as well. I will report back to you and let you know. Something Cool by June Christie, my number 9. At number 8, I have Dizzy Gillespie with Afro, released on Norgran. So the focus of this record is interesting. This is one of Gillespie's most famous albums, potentially his most famous just pure record. But the focus isn't really, at least in my view, on Gillespie as a trumpeter. The focus here is on Gillespie as a composer. The first side of this record is variations on this opening Manteca theme, played with this absolutely massive ensemble, a massive group of musicians, both traditional jazz musicians and Cuban musicians as well. Shout out in particular, not that he's Cuban, but a shout out to a young Quincy Jones who appears on trumpet on this record. And it's really interesting. Again, I really like hearing Gillespie in that setting, and I think it shows that he, as a composer and as an arranger, knows how to create a theme and knows how to expand upon it and change it in interesting ways, and that keeps that side of the record fresh. The second side, with more kind of standard tracks like your A Night in Tunisia's, your Caravans and stuff like that, that's where Gillespie as a trumpeter himself really shines. And again, puts his best foot forward as why he is one of the great trumpet players of this era of music for sure. I think really the only thing that holds me back from not saying like flat out, this is clearly one of the very, very best records of 1954. What holds it off a little bit for me is that the mix, at least in the streaming version of the record that I heard, might not be as present in the LP mixes or LP mastering. The mix is bright to the point of almost distorting itself at points. Like when those trumpets kick in, I mean, it genuinely almost feels like it's distorting the audio at times because of how bright it is. You roll off the high end a little bit, do that on the next CD remix or next streaming remix or what have you, and I think it'll sound way cleaner and might even bump itself. That might even bump it up a few spots on this list. But apart from that one nitpick, superb record, excellent playing, excellent arrangements. Again, love the fusion of jazz and Cuban styles on here. And again, Dizzy Gillespie, got to put some respect on his name. Afro, my number 8. At number 7, I have Lester Young with the Oscar Peterson Trio, with the record with the Oscar Peterson Trio. Now, this is technically kind of two separate records. There's number 1 and there's number 2, but I'm going to count them together as one for these purposes. Really superb sessions here. Lester Young, again, great, brilliant saxophone player. This is one of the later Lester Young records at this point, only a few years before he passed away. And certainly, I think one of the best sessions from an era when his performances were, by all accounts, quite choppy. Kind of like a very, like, you know, the descriptions of Charlie Parker from this era kind of taken to the extreme. Like Charlie Parker, at least from what I understand, could still come into a studio and deliver consistently strong performances. Lester Young, it sounds like it kind of depended on the day. But brilliant stuff, brilliant playing. Again, I talked about how much I appreciate Oscar Peterson and his ensemble just as featured artists. So as accompanists, I think they're brilliant. And I think they balance Young's saxophone lines really, really nicely on tracks like I Can't Get Started, like T for Two, On the Sunny Side of the Street. Again, Young as a player is really, you know, there's a real beauty to his style, and a real like technical proficiency as well. And again, I think the significance as well is also that he, in many ways, is the forefather of a lot of the styles, a lot of the technical choices that future tenor saxophonists will continue to make ongoing. So, in much the same way that the Charlie Parker record was from earlier in this list, I don't necessarily think this is maybe a emblematic of Young's best material, period. But I do think that this record gives certainly a bit of an edge over the Charlie Parker material, because I do think the core lineup that he has backing him is just, again, so very strong. Excellent stuff. Lester Young, Oscar Peterson trio, with the Oscar Peterson trio number 1 and number 2. Yeah, superb sessions, really worth checking out. They come in at my number 7. At number 6, just barely missing the top 5, I have Frank Sinatra with Songs for Young Lovers, released on Capitol. The first record to be put out on Capitol, and nothing short of a nuclear bomb compared to the previous records. And keep in mind that I like the previous Frank Sinatra records. Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra made my 1950 through 1952 video. But this, to me, is absolutely next level stuff. George Saravo, and I'm going to correct myself here. George Saravo is who does most of the arrangements on here. I think I've misspoken on that in the past. His arrangements are always beautiful and often stunning here. I mean, I like what he did on Sing and Dance with Frank Sinatra, but this is just next level stuff. It's absolutely superb. Just little bits like the sax line in They Can't Take That Away From Me is just haunting, gives me chills every time I hear it. Or that really twinkling piano that comes in and out in the recording of Violets for Your Furs. I mean, those two arrangement decisions just anchor everything for me. And when you pair that with Sinatra as a singer, who already, I think, has a little bit more warmth to his voice, whether that's because Capitol's recording studios are a little bit better, whether that's just a product of aging, who knows. But I think he fits these songs really, really effectively. And along with the previous two, I think the track A Foggy Day is maybe the best recording he had put out to this point. Just such an amazing mixture of crooning and really strong arrangements on here. Just really brilliant bits of phrasing and start and stop arrangements and that sort of thing. Absolutely superb stuff. I don't think anything else on the record gets to the height of those three songs, and I think that's part of why it doesn't quite make my top 5. I think if it was a record of songs at the level of those three, this would be my number 1. But even with that said, I think the rest of the album is still really good. My Funny Valentine, I think, is a great recording. But yeah, I don't know. It sets the stage for the famous saloon records that are to come. And again, I don't think it's actually as much of a drop off from them in quality as time has made it seem. Songs for Young Lovers, Frank Sinatra, superb record. Check it out. It comes in at my number 6. At number 5, I have the Art Blakey Quintet with A Night at Birdland. And again, there's 2 volumes of this. I'm going to pair them up together, Volume 1 and Volume 2, released on Blue Note. Again, I talked about how I'm going to be including some live recordings, and this is going to be one of them, because I think this is a brilliant live set. just a superb collection of songs, a superb recording. The lineup on this is absolutely stacked. I've been talking about Clifford Brown. I said he would make more appearances on this list, and he is part of this ensemble right here. Hearing him in this live setting, just again going off the cuff, is absolutely unreal. And you're hearing him duet with the great Lou Donaldson on saxophone. Lou Donaldson, just an absolutely terrific player who just passed away at the end of last year. Rest in peace. Absolutely brilliant stuff. They work off of each other really nicely. Horace Silver on the piano here, adding some great bluesy solos over the rhythm section of Blakey himself and Curly Russell on the bass. I mean, it's a who's who of names pretty much from this era, and it's stellar. It's absolutely remarkable. I think the rendition of A Night in Tunisia here is an all-timer. That's on the second volume. And I think Brown is just doing some amazing and absolute bonkers shit with the trumpet on that record. It's remarkable what he's doing. The other thing too about this record, which on streaming services, it's actually combined into like one release. So you can hear like the whole concert in full, which is really cool. The other thing about it is it sounds stunning for a live set in 1954. I've heard other live albums from this era, and they sound good, but I don't know if any sound quite as good as this, or at least it's a very small percentage. You get every like stray tone, every stray shimmer of a cymbal or of a particular note. It's captured as if it were recorded in a professional studio. And perhaps some of that is remastering and remixing and stuff like that, helping it take shape, but to me, I still think that says something about the general recording quality in general, that you can take that recording and get it to that level of fidelity. So, brilliant stuff. Art Blakey is someone I know we're going to be talking about a lot more. We're going to be talking about many of these people on this album, probably multiple times in the future. But yeah, brilliant live album, pair of live albums technically. And highly, highly worth checking out for anyone interested in this era of bop and hard bop music. A Night at Birdland Volumes 1 and 2, my number 5. At number 4, I have Chet Baker with Chet Baker Sings, released on Pacific Jazz. You know, this is, in many ways, I think, one of the most unassuming and unlikely records to ever be included on a list like this. You know, everything in theory seems to be working against Chet Baker, apart from the fact that he, certainly at the time, had basically movie star good looks. The guy was still very young, still a very fresh name in the jazz world, and had made his mark as a trumpeter. He had not made much of any attempt to sing at this point. And ultimately, when push comes to shove, Chet Baker is not technically a great singer. But there's a magic to this record that makes it unique, and that makes it distinct compared to other vocal jazz albums from the era. It's very hypnotic. You know, again, as I said, Baker is not technically a great singer, but I think the fact that his voice sounds amateurish on some level, the fact that you can tell that like he's not perfecting the phrasing here, it sounds like someone who is not necessarily like always going to be staying quite in key at all times. I think it works well as sort of the antithesis to a traditional crooner performance. It feels genuine. It feels real. It feels like you're being sung to by kind of your average person, like perhaps your own partner, right? It feels like, you know, if you're someone who was in a relationship with someone who happened to be good looking but was not a musical savant, and if he tried singing these things to you, you might know in your heart of hearts that it's not objectively the best thing you've ever heard, but it moves you, and it's powerful, and it means something. There's a lot of beauty to that, and there's a lot of power to that, and I think that is exactly why this record is still to this day considered one of the best vocal jazz albums of all time, and Chet Baker's defining work. My Funny Valentine is the famous one, and it's clearly a standout recording, just absolutely terrific. I might even prefer I Fall in Love Too Easily to it a little bit. But again, it's close. Again, it's that same very delicate style throughout most of these ballads here. I think the ensemble playing is really good. I really like how the trumpet playing on this record is perfectly matched with his vocal delivery. It's very reserved and very professionally executed, but also without killing the balance between the less polished vocals and the trumpet playing. We're not put in a situation where you have this binary between elite trumpet player, one of the best going, which Chet Baker was, and amateurish singing. The balance is crossed somehow. And really, it's a remarkable achievement. Again, not quite my number one for this year, because there are other records that I tend to prefer that I think ultimately are maybe better executed in some ways, but this is also an album where if you told me that this was your number one, I would 100% get it. It's not an album that I actually personally ever really got the appeal of as much as some people until this most recent listen. This time around, it opened itself up for me. And I saw the appeal, I saw the emotional appeal, and everything else. So it's superb, it's beautiful, it's unique, and it's my number 4, Chet Baker Sings. At number 3, I have Dinah Washington with After Hours with Miss D, released on MRC. I talked about the Toshiko Akiyoshi record and how this was my favorite like discovery from this era, but from this year. And I kind of forgot that I don't think I'd ever heard this record before this listen. And holy mackerel, it blew me away. It starts with some goddamn fucking authority, I tell you what. You have Blue Skies, which is 11 minutes long, but it is an absolute barn burner. It's amazing how well this thing holds up with the terrific ensemble that Washington is singing with and with her own kind of vocals. And the record doesn't let up afterwards. I think the way to describe it is that these tracks really are like they're genre crossing, I suppose. Really R&B in the purest sense. You have these tracks that are remarkably jazzy, some of them. Some tracks that are dipping into like very bluesy influences. And then you have some that even contain a very gospel influenced organ. Specifically the track Am I Blue is what I'm thinking of there. But it straddles that line. And you get so many of these influences. And I can't tell you how like rare that is for someone to be able to find that balance, even in that era when jazz music and blues music, there's that very, close relationship there. They haven't quite diverged paths as much as they would in coming decades. It's so hard to do that. And it's so hard for someone who is technically a great jazz singer to do great singing blues music. But Dinah Washington sells it. She is amazing. Her voice has a real rasp to it. Which generally I feel like when you think of someone who has a raspy voice, kind of like what we were talking about with June Christie earlier, there's that sense that it's limited in its agility, it's limited in what it can do, but that's not at all the case with Washington. She has a very agile voice, a superb voice, very Billie Holiday-like. I get that comparison for sure, and a lot of people make it, but I think the stronger like vocal chops, like the core vocal chops in that aspect of it, I think Washington beats Holiday. I think Holiday was a bit more of a limited singer, a bit more of a limited range. Washington has the range. She can back it up. Holy shit. Bye Bye Blues is superb. I think the rendition of A Foggy Day is excellent. I Let a Song Go Out of My Heart. And again, this is a record that is making use of the LP format. It's almost 40 minutes long. These songs are going for sometimes 6-7 minutes in length or even longer. And yeah, it's remarkable how forward thinking this album is, how much this seems to kind of hint at where a lot of these styles are going to go in the future. And again, for someone who knew of Dinah Washington but had not heard this record before, I was completely floored. Absolutely floored. It's not quite my number one. I think there's a couple of records that I would personally take over this as far as evaluating them as records, but holy cow, I'm not sure that I had a more powerful listening experience in this entire dive of this year than this one right here. After Hours with Miss D by Dinah Washington. It's my number 3, and I'm really excited to check out more Dinah Washington records after this. If they're anything even close to this level of quality, we're going to be in for a fun time. At number 2, I have Louis Armstrong with Louis Armstrong Plays W.C. Handy, released on Columbia. So I'm not doing a discography dive on Louis Armstrong. It's too complicated for several reasons. I think a huge part of it is just it's such a massive discography, so many albums to check out, and the albums that he's put out don't by any means cover the duration of his career. And a big barrier that I thought going in was that, well, a lot of his best material was in the 20s and the 30s. And while he recorded some great stuff in the 50s and 60s and so forth, that it wouldn't be representative necessarily of his absolute best. Now, I'm still probably not doing an Armstrong discography dive, but my feelings as far as like how strong his 50s material was have been changed multiple times. First with my Ella Fitzgerald dive, where I revisited the collaborative records between Armstrong and Fitzgerald and realized how amazing they are. And now with this record. This Louis Armstrong Plays W.C. Handy is an absolutely outstanding, absolutely immaculate record. And one thing that connects it actually to my number 3 with the Dinah Washington record is that this is Armstrong taking the LP format and using it up to its absolute limits. The Dinah Washington record is almost 40 minutes long. This record is over 50 minutes long, which is like unheard of compared to most of these other albums that I'm talking about on this list, the 4-hour Bing Crosby record notwithstanding. And Armstrong is, experimenting with the format and experimenting with these song lengths while also taking a very conscious look back at his own musical heritage. Exploring the history of the blues and exploring the history of these styles that in some ways would parallel and inspire what Armstrong would do himself when he was coming up. And it's so cool to hear this type of a tribute to W.C. Handy, one of the most important songwriters and musicians really in American musical history when you think about it. It's so cool to hear that tribute in general, especially when you know that Handy was alive to hear it, and from what I understand actually did respect this recording quite a bit. The playing is stellar. Armstrong is certainly the focal point as a vocalist, as a trumpet player, and he sounds unbelievable. Just so bright, so powerful in this session. But I have to give just a massive shout out to the trombonist Trummy Young and the clarinetist Barney Bigard. They do so much heavy lifting themselves with the kind of counterpoint melodies. Again, this is taking, this bluesy kind of Dixieland style of music. Again, the type of music that Armstrong cut his teeth on, and thrusting it into the 50s with updated recording technology and things of that nature, so that now everything sounds present. You can hear these counter melodies from these different instruments come through and cut through with such clarity. And that's an element that was always present in 20s music. If you go listen to that era, you find just a bunch of different like individual melody lines and stuff that are all coming together and coalescing together to form this, this amazing whole, this very complex whole. But hearing it in this setting really makes it stand out. There's a lot of strong tracks on here. I'm going to be cliched and point out the rendition of the signature song by Handy, St. Louis Blues. 9 minutes, almost 9 minutes long, but it is absolutely sensational. And it's so much fun too. Velma Middleton is the other vocalist on here. I don't think she's reinventing the wheel as a singer, but I think she works really well. And I think she and Armstrong play off each other really nicely. They sound like they are genuinely having fun here. And again, that's going to be the case with everything else, whether that's Loveless Love, whether that's Beale Street Blues, Ole Miss Blues, Hesitating Blues. I mean, just, again, it's enjoyable. It sounds like everyone involved is having fun. And it's really like highest level of musicianship when it comes down to it. So the fact that it's operating at that level while also experimenting with this new format means that really, again, it's one of the most musically revolutionary things that was happening in 1954, despite the fact that it's clearly a look back at the past. And it's a look back at older genres. And that combination is a hell of a thing. So Louis Armstrong plays W.C. Handy. I don't know if this is going to be my favorite Louis Armstrong record in general, but it certainly makes a strong case for it. And certainly for this list's purposes, it comes in at my number 2. And at number 1, I have the self-titled record by Clifford Brown and Max Roach, released on MRC. So, the outfit that Brown performed with at Art Blakey's Birdland show that I talked about earlier is absolutely stellar. I mean, just remarkably strong lineup. But after listening to this album right here, it's kind of hard for me not to call this possibly the best jazz lineup of its time. This is completely anchored around Clifford Brown. I mean, this is his showcase. This is his coming out party. Not just in performance, but in name, because now his name is attached to this. And you mix it with Max Roach, who I've maybe mentioned in passing a couple of times in these videos as either a performer or as an honorable mention, but hasn't really gotten his flowers as a leader yet. And you know, at this point, he's definitely one of the most respected drummers in the New York City scene. So him and Brown pairing up with a really strong lineup was always going to be good. But instead, this becomes something transcendent and truly a generational record. The track Parisian Thoroughfare, I think that song is a absolute masterclass in dynamics. The piece lives through Roach's drums here. As well as, I think in particular, his like cymbal and hi-hat work. And I actually think that's the case with a lot of this record. I think what helps this record have impact in a way that some of the other hard bop records from this period don't, is that there's a lot of presence in the drums that isn't there before. And I'm not saying that because I'm partial to the drums. I mean, I do feel like they have actually mic'd his drums really closely and boosted it in the mix potentially a little bit so that it sounds super damn prominent here all the time. So these songs have a real sense of presence, a real sense of power behind them. And that's all credit to Roach, certainly. Now, this is not to say that Clifford Brown is not on another planet either. His solos are consistently outstanding. Tracks like the opening track, Delilah, which is superb, a classic for sure. Dahoud, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. His solo there might be his best on the record. I think it's superb. The unsung hero is absolutely Richie Powell's piano, though. Richie Powell, another figure who was ultimately lost way too soon, like Clifford Brown. They both tragically passed away in the same car accident a couple years after this. But Powell, the brother of Bud, is really like he's comping with style on these tracks. And when he's able to get to solo a little bit, like on the opening of the track Joy Spring, I mean, his solo bits are slick as hell. I think that's just a spectacular opening to that track. Don't sleep on Harold Land's tenor sax either. It's not very frequent, I don't think, that the tenor saxophone is one of the more background players in some of these records, but credit to Land. I think he gives these pieces some flavor and I think works as a real solid foil for Brown here, even if he doesn't have the name recognition that some of the others do. And George Morrow's bass, I think, is in lockstep with Roach the whole time. If I don't have a ton of words to say about how he's a distinguishing player, someone who distinguishes himself from the crowd, that's not a complaint. That's just saying I think he works really well with Roach, and Roach is, again, just such a powerful presence on this record that it's hard to compete with him. Really, yeah, it's one of the best studio albums of its era. Again, it experiments with length a little bit, so it's longer than some of these other releases. And again, I think as far as paving the way for what jazz music would become for the duration of the 50s, you know, without minimizing the work of other major artists of this era, like your Miles Davises and stuff like that, this record was the future. This record was it at that point. And While it didn't necessarily reflect exactly who was going to be part of said future, again, with Brown and Powell passing away not too long after this, it nevertheless, I think, showed like where the inventiveness, where the technical proficiency of jazz music was headed and what people needed to do if they wanted to be on that train and not getting left behind in the dust. So, as a showcase for Brown and Roach and for that whole ensemble, it's spectacular. I'm curious to see with some of the other records that they released as a duo how this thing compares to them. I know a lot of people think that some of the later records are even better than this. That wasn't my experience when I first heard these, but I'm curious to see how that changes. In any case, this was not a super difficult choice for number one. It's one of the best jazz records of the 1950s. Potentially Clifford Brown's shining moment, the shining moment of his career, and just stellar front to back. Clifford Brown and Max Roach, self-titled record, my number one. All right, and that is it. So let me know in the comments below what your favorite albums of 1954 are. Have you checked out any of these records? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below, as I said. Also, if you've heard other records that you think should have been on this list, let me know. I'm curious to get any recommendations, of course. And also let me know what your favorite records of 1955 are. That will be the next, of course, video in this series, so I'm curious to get any recommendations that you have for that year, and I can add them to my list. With that, thanks so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. As always, more videos and reviews are to come. Make sure to hit that bell for notifications and tell a friend as well. Thanks a lot, and I will see you next time right here at your home of the Music Deep Dive.